Oh, maybe the first you could tell why did you become a programmer?
Yeah, so I think it kind of started on a young age already. Um,
Aha.
um, I got inspired by my dad a bit because he was a teacher, funny enough, a teacher in doing more like art kind of things, so with clay and all these kind of things. But in the Netherlands back then, it was really hard to be a teacher, and the salary was really low as well. So what he did is he started re-educating himself into more like IT management, project management kind of thing. And he did that while I was very young. But interestingly, that created, he bought a ZX Spectrum to program with.
Ah.
He got this huge floppy disk, which I
Yeah,
found
yeah.
really interesting as a kid. So I got into the quite early with all this technology, while it was not normal yet to have it at home.
Mhm.
Also, I remember my dad was quite early with this modems. They could call to the office
Yeah,
to get an internet connection, which was back then like, wow, is this possible? You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and I remember that then you pick up the phone and you hear all the weird noises,
yeah,
and so
yeah.
that from a young kid that was really intriguing me. Like, how does this work? What is this? So actually, I started playing with small games on ZX Spectrum. That's
Mhm.
kind of how it started. And I remember there was no memory or hard disk, so you had this huge book and you have to type over all the code to just have the game. And when you put the machine off again, the code was gone. So there was no
Wow.
storage. The only way you could do that was with a cassette tape. You
Yeah,
could
yeah.
record that and then play it off again. But first, you had to type over the whole book to have that game.
But could you sell it? Could you save it to the to this cassette?
Yeah.
The
And then
game.
you could
Okay,
just
so
need to process. Yeah.
yeah.
But that intrigued me because it's like, hey, I'm just typing over some words. And actually, I see something on the screen happening and I can play with it, right? And you can even
Mhm.
change it. So if you change some parameter, maybe your ship was twice as big, or
Aha.
this kind of interesting. So that really creative tricked like some creativity in that side.
Yeah.
And that was young age, right? So that was very early, but that immediately got my attention also later on with it was a 368 machines like with
Hmm.
DOS and
Hmm.
DOS. And there I always try to figure out how does it work? Can I change it? Yeah? Can I change this game? Can I create something to make it different or play with that? And
How
that
old?
kept going on. It's like a hobby process
Uh-huh.
kind of, right? So then internet starting up a bit more. So there were websites and like, hey, I'm looking at this website. Oh, it's just HTML. I can change that. And then like, hey, I see this PHP 3 thing behind the HTML. What does it mean? Can I change something? How does that work? And that's how I started also understanding web development and how that works with programming languages. And that was all pre-study actually. So that was all self-learning, just from interest, figuring things out.
Hmm.
And of course, it helped that my dad was a bit knowledge on that area. And also, I also had some friends who were also interested in that, so that helped. Because we, for example, we had like this garage sale kind of things here in the area where
Hmm.
people just go and they put some stuff on the street to sell. And there were old computers there, and we just bought everything because we wanted
Wow.
to play with it, taking them apart, like, so that's how it kind of started. And then for me, it was already quite obvious when I was around 14, 15 years
14.
old.
Okay.
That would be my career direction because I liked playing with that. And actually, I already started making websites and these kind of things back then. So yeah.
And what year was that?
I'm now 35. So yeah, that's like 20 years ago.
20 years ago, around 2000. Yeah. Okay. And what happened then after that? Did you go to the university to study computer science?
Yeah, so at like the middle school, so that's from
Yeah.
something like 14, 15, 16, that area when I was that age. Actually, I was kind of bored with the studies because, I mean, if you had the IT course, it was about how to turn on your computer, like, and I was
Okay.
already programming. So I was like, okay, that I don't care. So there I didn't do much apart from more like hobby and actually I think I also made some money with some small projects, small website creation. Yeah, but very small, just helping out someone or these kind of things. But yeah, after that studies, I had two directions. I was also quite interested in like the biology area.
Ah.
So I was thinking, could I combine that? So initially I was looking for like bioinformatics to do
Hmm.
like to try to combine the biological part together with like more IT thing. But back then that was basically a farmer study, so it was more about how to control your robot for the farming, right? And not about the real DNA or other biological things. So then I just went to Amsterdam to do the normal informatics study. So I skipped the bioinformatics and went for normal.
Okay.
And it went very well. And actually, on my first year, I already got a proper paid job, just like maybe 8 hours a week, just as an extra job next to your studies.
What kind of job? Just as a programmer?
Yeah, so that was web development mostly. So creating some website or a web shop, helping setting that up. Actually, already mostly web development, simple web development.
Okay.
And nice. That's also how I met you, of course, because I already started at 17 at Hives.
At 17, it was Hives already.
Yeah, that was a bit later, but before I also did other web development, but that was really early on. Yeah.
But you graduated from the university by back then.
Yeah. So I did only the bachelor. So I only did the first 4 year, and I never did the master study of that. Which is 1 extra year. So I had like maybe 80% of the master study, but not the last part. That was like 22, 23, because first I did 4 years of the studies for my 17, 18 years old. I joined this bachelor program, and you could extend it with a master.
Okay.
And that part I didn't do.
Okay.
Because I was already working full time, and I mean, that was something interesting for me during that studies. I learned at the job so much more than I learned at the whole studies. So that was really pushing me a bit, like, okay, I'm now working at this cool startup which is growing and becoming big, or I can do these studies with stuff which is 5 years old and I probably won't learn much. It was quite a difficult decision though, because I mean, my parents, for example, were like, you need the paper, right? You need the diploma. The diploma, the university diploma is way better than just a bachelor. So you should really do that.
Okay.
And I didn't do that in the end. And so far, fine.
Was it a good decision?
I think in the end, it was a good decision. Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting, because people really often ask, do I have to go and try to find work, or do I have to spend 4 years at the university trying to learn computer science and then trying to find a job, right?
Yeah, it's difficult because there are also benefits, I would say. In the studies, I mean, I didn't learn proper programming very well, but for example, skills like English, I got teach very well, and they grade you, and if you're not good enough, you get extra courses and become really good at English. Also in speaking, listening, presentation skills, more the soft skills, maybe also a bit of leadership, how you manage a team, because in the studies we had working groups. You would be like team lead for a project. As a junior person, so you learn that. And if you just start job right away, you might skip those skills a bit. So I think you might be lacking there. So I think for the broader spectrum, it's been very valuable for me. Because I did do 4 years of studies, right? So just not the last part.
If you work for Hives, we had a lot of different people from around all the world. And what's your experience?
I think it's about different nationalities, right? So I think Hives was an interesting company because in the Netherlands, like 20 years ago, remote working, all these things were not that much yet, right? If you had people from abroad working here, they're mostly here for like a plan, right? They moved here and wanted to stay for a long time. And then during Hives, actually that started changing. People were more flexible and maybe live somewhere abroad for a few years just to try it out. And with Hives, that was really cool because we had people from India, we had people from Russia, we had people from all over the place, actually. And it was really a mix of cultures. And that was pretty cool to see. What is interesting, what I did notice, it was always sort of similar kind of person, though, a little like outgoing, not outgoing in sense of socially, but like interested in other countries, interested in traveling, right? It was mostly looking for, and that's also what I found interesting. Some people I'm still in contact with, but some are now in Ireland or in France, or you know, they're not fixed in one position. Well, one person actually I had a very good contact with. He moved to San Francisco to work for Google. Like, why not?
Okay. What else did these people had in common? Like, of course, they were good programmers, probably, right?
Yeah, that was for hires. When we started hiring from different countries, the level of experience you need to have was quite high. And so we were not really looking at the stage of that company. We're not looking for very junior people much.
Right.
If we did that, it was more like on internships, and that was more from local universities and not from abroad much. But yeah, other common. I think it was mostly people very interested in the technology. So technology driven, because Hives was offering, Hives was a social network, and half of the Netherlands was on that network.
Right.
And back then, it was quite difficult to have a website for so many people at the same time, all interacting with each other. It was really technically challenging.
Yeah.
And that really attracted people a lot, for sure. So it were always people looking to do something difficult or innovative or the next step.
You were interviewing people, right? You actually, and what were you looking for? What should these people have in order to pass your interview?
Yeah, so I remember at the Hives is already a while back, right? It's already 10 years back or so.
10 years, yeah.
But back then we were really strict on the core principles of engineering. So think about the mathematics, think about the data structures, think about the core elements of engineering.
Okay.
I think in that period it made sense because we were dealing with such high scale that if you messed up an algorithm, it becomes very slow and it will stop working. So we needed people to understand that well. But if you look nowadays, I think it's easier to build for scale. So nowadays, I think I would not stress that hard on the mathematics and the data structures per se. And that's also, you have had a question as well around where do you see the IT moving? And I think that's definitely interesting to know.
Yeah.
Because at Hives, it was more like you are a software engineer or not, right? And the software engineer can do everything. He can make the scale, he can make the website work nicely, etc. But now you see way more different kind of specialties. One person will be more focused on just the front end, making a nice interaction and making it smooth. One other person on the back end more focused on this high scalability, for example, with the data structures. Or maybe one other person way more focused on the data, which comes in to make data learnings, machine learning. So there are way more different specialties, I think. And that's also going forward 20 years. Probably it will even be broader because every company nowadays needs an engineer. Software engineer, and maybe not a hardcore software engineer who knows his data structures and algorithms, but maybe someone who can configure the web shop very nicely. So I think there is much more different levels of software engineering nowadays, and it will only continue. Way broader.
Okay, all right. And why did it? It's a pretty obvious question, but why did it happen? Why every company needs a software engineer now? Why can't they outsource them, for example? Or
that happens a lot as well, of course. But I think anyone can buy a web shop software and set up a web shop. But what makes your web shop good is if you do some special things. Maybe you also have a nice app, or you have, and to make that happen, you need your engineers for your company to make that happen, I think. But it depends on the market. Every market is different. But if you look at most IT companies or internet companies who offer clothes or shopping online, or maybe offering some tool to use in your app as an application on your phone, they want to. It's their core business that works well, so they need engineers to make that work well.
And how is it going to continue? Are we going to? Are we going to have only programmers in these companies, or would it end at some moment, or would they find a solution for that? Because it cannot continue. The salaries cannot go up and up indefinitely. At some moment, there will be like a stop in this.
I think you already see that happening a bit now.
Okay.
If you look, for example, for a junior front-end developer to be able to do some maybe just a basic application on the phone, those salaries are, I think, already a bit lower than an engineer with 10 years experience and maybe more hardcore on the data structures. So I think if you have these jobs, because the software engineering becomes broader, you also have less difficult software engineering
Okay.
roles, which are maybe not paid that well
Okay.
or
And
easier to do. Maybe, maybe there's more people who are able to do that because not everyone is strong in math, but maybe there's more people are also strong in more the visualization of things. So you get more people become software engineer by name.
Okay,
But
so
it's a different role. It's a different role still.
different role. Oh, so you mean it's getting easier and easier to become a software engineer, right?
Yeah, I think kind of that's true. Yeah, and also because it's more. Um, I mean, like 10 years, 20 years ago, a software engineer needs to do it all. And now it's more split, right? So you have someone maybe focused on just front end, and that's easier to get into and quicker than the other parts. Also, what also helps is the industry also continues on tooling, which also make it easier. If I take a look at Hives, where we had the high scalability problems with too many people doing the same things at once, those problems are now less because you have Amazon Cloud or Google Cloud, and you click together something and it goes automatically.
Right.
And it costs money, but it's way easier to do. So more companies can do that, and they don't need 20 engineers to do that. So that I think the need for engineers also goes down because of that.
Okay.
But more companies need engineers. So yeah. Every company needs to be online now, right? So they need to do something there, and it's okay to not have maybe the rocket scientist for a web shop. It's fine.
Okay, so you're doing this thing like for 20 years already, almost, right? So what are you going to do in 10 years, in 15 and 20?
Yeah, so currently I'm also a bit more on the leadership side. So involved with the management team of the company and really hiring and creating teams. Also thinking about how do software engineering teams work best? Do I need 4 people, 8 people? So these kind of decisions. I think I will do that still probably in 10 or 20 years. But the question would be maybe more about what kind of company or what kind of, for example, I like innovative technologies. So recently, the last few years, I worked a lot on blockchain technology. And probably in 10 and 20 years, it will be something else. But yeah, so I do like that leadership role, but it's also because of my experience already. I know how to build a team. So that makes sense that I can do that with my developers. But still, I'm still a developer in sort of my blood because I want to understand the technology. I want to be involved in those decisions. I don't want to just be the manager. And that's not mine. And that's I think you see that a lot with software engineers who get experience. They become a bit of a leadership, but they want to stay with the technology still. They don't want to be just manager.
Do you still write the code?
I still write code, yeah.
Okay.
But it's maybe more on experiments or these kind of levels. So for me, as more like a managing role, it's hard to be day-to-day involved in development. Yeah, because you have meetings, you have all kinds of things in the middle. So you don't have a full day where you can focus often. So it makes more sense to maybe have more one-off kind of things, like experiments or research things, or maybe development operations at DevOps is one thing I do a lot lately.
I see. Yeah. Do you miss this kind of work, or you really enjoy managing people and building up the team? And
I sometimes do really miss to be able to close yourself for maybe a few weeks and really build something.
I know some people don't want to do management and they don't like other people. They want to. Do they have an alternative? Do they have any other way to grow and do something important in like 15 years?
For sure, yeah. I think that's more about specializing and becoming the specialist. For example, most big companies who have a lot of engineers, they always have a couple of engineers who are really thinking on the bigger picture, the infrastructure, the technical decisions. Do we go for technology A or B? And research that decision. So that's more, and I think that's also maybe a bit of, but it is more soft skill again, but there's also maybe a bit more mentoring. So let's imagine you have more junior developers. They will ask questions. Do we need to go this way or that way? Is this correct? Is it a good idea? and there you have more the senior people who lead on that level, I think.
Okay.
So it's not leading, not like managing people, but more like technology lead.
Okay. And you mentioned that you have to specialize. Do you have to follow like any specific technology, like very narrow path, or you still have to know a lot of?
I mean, I think software engineers always keep changing their path. You always keep learning. Technology constantly changes. So if you're stuck in one path, that's not very wise.
Right.
But I think what you do mean is like specializing makes sense because, for example, you can imagine someone is really specialized in the scalability problem. Like we have a website that's slow, we need to grow that. Then if you have experience in that, you are specialized in that, and then they would have more luck there than someone who is specialized in developing for embedded devices, which is also a specialization, but way different.
Advices for the junior developers, if you have any advice, any recommendation, what to do to become a programmer?
Maybe one topic I think would be good to quickly talk about a bit. So I did a lot of hiring and still doing hiring and building teams, etc.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah.
I think a couple of important characteristics I'm mostly looking at are about, and that I must give some context here. So I'm mostly working for small companies, small startups. So people need to be, there's not a whole team. You need to do multiple things at once. It's not like you have your colleague who's doing design and next colleague doing the implementation of design, and you only have to do this part. Sometimes you have to be more roles. So that's just the context. But what I really look for in hiring, what makes a developer good, I think would be around responsibility, ownership, and care of something. So let's say I give you a task, you take it serious. You take the responsibility of doing that task and you're the best you want to do. And if you have some ideas about it to do it better, you would raise that. And you also take care of finishing that. So it becomes your child, right? It becomes your baby in code or in product or etc. So I think that's important. Responsibility really helps the developer to make the next step, to become better, to become more senior. Because if you look at like from manager point of view or company point of view, you want to have someone where you can say, I want this. And you say, yes, I can do that. It will take 4 months and it makes sense. And he will do that in 4 months and not like every day ask, hey, are you still working on that? I mean, the responsibility is really important, I think. Another one is, I think, and that's something which for more older software engineers is a bit more difficult, but I think a team is really important. Team play is really important because you have to work with other people nowadays. You have, like I mentioned, you have this front-end developer doing the front end. If you are the back-end developer, you have to work together. So being a team is important. And that skills, I think in any company is of course important, but it's very rarely a software engineer works only alone. It's always with other people.
Right.
Further, self-organizing, but it is very similarly to the ownership, that you self-organize your work, and I think that's also tapping into remote work. Being able to self-organize is also important if you work more remotely. Have clear for yourself, I'm going to work on this today and this tomorrow, for example. And this is more like in general, but I think that makes sense because software engineering is more like, in essence, better people or people more technically focused compared to maybe socially focused or language focused. But logical thinking helps a lot. That makes it way easier to become an engineer because often everything is logic. There's logic behind languages and software engineering.
I noticed that you didn't mention any like programming skills or know how to like knowing algorithms or data structures. You didn't mention that.
Because I mean it's really dependent on the role. This is more generic, I would say. So of course, if you should work on security, it's important you understand security principles well, and etc. So those things are important for such a role. But I think there's no one general. If you are good at object-oriented programming, you will be a good engineer. That's not the case, right? You can also be a very good engineer without object-oriented programming, for example. I would say, but that depends on the role for sure.
Okay, so sometimes you don't care if they can do object-oriented programming or they don't, right? If
we have a company where we have, I don't know, maybe Golang, there is no object-oriented programming in Golang. It's functional. So yeah, that would be fine then maybe for that role. But it depends, right?
It depends.
Yeah.
Okay. What about age? Do you care if he's like 50? Okay, it's Netherlands, but still, do you care if this person like 50 years old or 18 years old?
No, it doesn't matter at all.
Does not matter at all.
I think, and that's another question you mentioned. I think what does become then maybe a bit more important if someone like 50 years old.
Yeah.
One thing, and that's also on my list of good characteristics, would be that he's a learner. Yeah, like I mentioned, languages change, frameworks change. Every few years, we need to learn new things. Maybe if someone older, I would ask a bit more questions about if he's open to learn new things.
Okay.
That will be the only thing I think which matters.
That's clear. Yeah, that's clear. And what about education?
Yeah, so studies is only one part. I think work experience is maybe even more valuable. But if we talk about maybe a junior, I do think, like I mentioned earlier, also about myself, I think someone who had studies gets a bit more professionality in that. But it could also be that that person got it in a different way. Maybe he freelanced for a time, and then he also get more professional on that. I think it's not per se I would never put studies as a hard requirement.
Okay.
But if someone doesn't have a certain study or a lower grade study, I would maybe ask a bit more, try to figure out more if he really knows it, right? I would have maybe a bit more doubt to start.
Do you have any advice for a programmer to earn more, to get higher salary?
Yeah, I think that taps into the good characteristics of a developer. But I think the easiest way to get your salary up is get more experience.
Get more experience. Okay.
And you can really help yourself with that to maybe challenge yourself inside the job or inside the company, or if that doesn't work out at the company, maybe challenge yourself with a different company to switch jobs.
Okay.
Because if you keep challenging yourself, your experience will grow quicker than you are comfortable just doing the same thing every day, right?
Yeah.
So I think that definitely helps. Other things would be what I mentioned. Is like I mentioned, take the responsibility of things, because then you more quickly would grow to maybe a lead of the team. Become technical lead of a team, because the company or the manager knows that if you take onto something, it will be fine, right? To give that trust. And I think that will definitely help you raise your salary in that function or in your team. What else did I mention? Yeah, and this is also interesting. What you can also do with salaries, it also, the amount of pay depends a lot as well on the domain you're working in. Like I mentioned, let's say you work for this small web shop, your pay will never be very high. But if you start working for maybe booking.com, it's way easier to get in a higher pay grade range. Yeah, you had a question here. Do you think programmers are better paid in other professions? I think for the specialists, that's definitely true. The experienced ones, they will definitely get a higher salary than maybe a similar job where you lead, because they're rare. There are not that many very good, very experienced developers. But on the other hand, the company needs to fit that, so they will not work at a small web shop. But I think if you talk about a more low-level developer, which is still fine on the web shop, that salary will not per se be much higher than some other job. At this moment, because there are way more of those as well. But the nicest thing about the software engineering or programming role would be that you can grow quite high in salary. You have to put your shoulder on it, and you have to work hard, but you can really grow in your salary way more than maybe a dentist could be, right? It's quite always on the same level, but in the software engineering, you can really go up.
Wow. All right.
I had one more from the good points, good characteristics of a developer. I also had some bad points. Maybe it's good.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting. Okay, let's.
What I have experience with engineers or developers which are not happy about, which are mostly people who fiddle around and get it working, but don't really understand why. And you have many of these engineers. So I think it's also always a good idea to take a moment to think about, I fiddled around with the code, just trying some things. We all do this, trial and error, just try and to get it working. But once it works, why does it now work? Ask yourself this question. I think that's important because there are many developers who don't, and they just fiddle around. It works, okay, I'm not never going to look at it again, right? But then you don't learn anything and you get bad code. So I think it's good to think about why something works if you get it working.
Okay.
I think this is also interesting one. Too stubborn. That's also happening a lot. There are many engineers who are very stubborn. Often they are maybe even a bit arrogant. At least in the Netherlands, I see that sometimes. They already made high salaries. They already know everything, and then they are sort of like, "No, I want this, and otherwise I won't do it." You know. But be a team player. Be also open to other things, even though you're experienced and have well paid. And this is the one which is maybe uninvolved. That will be it's a bit the counter thing of what I mentioned, that someone takes responsibility. But an uninvolved developer will be, give me a task to do, I'll do it. Just waiting for the next task. Really not caring.
Let's say you're interviewing a person from abroad. Would it be different from when you're interviewing a person who is already in the Netherlands? Do you have an advice for the person from abroad? What they can do to increase their chances to...
Yeah, that's a good point. I think being face-to-face is always better, for sure. And I think that helps understanding someone better. The interview goes smoother. It's easier to also break the ice, take away maybe a bit of stress or that kind of things. Also, it's easier. What I also like with like brainstorming or quickly on a whiteboard do something, that's way easier face to face. But still, I think remote is also very doable nowadays. We have good tools as well. Also, maybe to have like live coding somewhere together, like an exercise. You can do these things very well nowadays. So, tips for remote hiring, I think would be is to really maybe even have a post-it on your screen, like what are the key things I'm trying to sell myself for, right? Okay, I want to say my experience. I want to be able to say this. You should have a list of things you want to bring over in that conversation for yourself. I think that's very important because during the conversation, there's no agenda, right? So maybe you forget about to explain your very cool project you did 3 years ago. But you should tell that because that's really important. So be sure you have a short list for yourself of things you want to really bring over, because remotely that's harder than face to face. Face to face, you get you're a bit more there. While remotely, sometimes I have interviews with the founder. 70% of the time the founder is talking. That doesn't give a lot of room for the candidate to show his interest and his experience. And founders always want to talk, right? They're pitching. So make sure you bring over your important points. I think that's very important for remote interviews. Further, I think also take the time. Don't walk around calling. Don't sit in a room. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the closet, whatever, but at least have focus for the interview. Don't get distracted. Also, don't start typing things. Be focused on the conversation. Remotely, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe for Russians, what I notice with Russian interviews often is sometimes the English is really bad, and I notice that often. So I think what is important, if you would do a remote interview for Western Europe, make sure your English is good. Okay. Practice that before, maybe talk a few days English before you do the interview, but make sure you are fluent in trying to bring over what you're saying. That really helps.
Is it different from other nationalities, from other countries?
I think, kind of, because in Western Europe, maybe it's easy. A lot of countries are used in English more. And I think in Russian, it's still, especially for the engineers, they maybe are a bit more, I even sometimes see GitHubs with Russian code, right? Okay. And in Western Europe, you don't see that. There's no Spanish code or French code, or Dutch code. It's all English.
Okay. That's clear. Excited.
Oh yeah, maybe another one which, just for my mind, from what I remember from interviews with Russians, And that's something which depends a lot as well, context-wise. And by the way, it's not just Russians. We have the same with people from India as well. But in Western Europe, especially the smaller companies, startups, scale-ups in Amsterdam or around there, are quite flat in hierarchy, meaning you can talk with your boss anytime, it's fine. There's not someone sitting on your desk looking every day like, make sure you do that, right? It's really self-organized, flat organization. And I notice from Russian, often there's a bit more hierarchy expectance. And that's maybe good to consider. And that's also what I noticed I worked 2 years ago for like 3 years with a Russian guy. He was really experienced, really senior, but he was really like the boss, like he acted like the boss. And I think in Western companies that doesn't help. But that's just a tip. And the same in India. In India, you have the similar, right? You have really like a hierarchy. And it's fine to say no, or, it's fine to say something which the boss might not like to hear. That's not a problem for many of these companies.
Yeah. Do you work nowadays? Do you work a lot with Russian programmers?
No, so currently I actually have a French, Portuguese, and someone from Bulgaria. When I work with now, yeah. But interestingly, I'm in the middle of maybe going for a different job.
Yeah.
But there, it's a lot of Ukrainians actually. Yeah.
And are they different? Do they have all these different nationalities? Do they have their own specific, threats? Like, are they different, or
I think nationality is not making someone like, oh, he is definitely Portuguese because he does that. I mean, people are all over the place. For example, the Portuguese guy I'm working with, he's more introvert. Well, many Portuguese are really extrovert and talking a lot. So, I mean, it's not really like that. Well, what is interesting, for example, the Portuguese guy, he really likes to work outside.
What do you mean outside?
Because he's used to be outside a lot. In Portugal, you're outside a lot because the weather is nice.
Okay.
So it's just, and for example, in the summer, and that's also the flexibility that many of these smaller companies give you. But in the summer, he really wants to go to Portugal to work outside all day, and he was still want to work, but he just wanted to be at home with family and still work. So I think that's also important to understand. It's fine to move around and maybe live somewhere else, but it's also fine to go visit family and work remotely. And that's maybe the topic we should also talk about, is how Corona changed us.
Yeah.
I think it changed a lot, especially in Western European startups, IT, software engineering, because you remember also with Hives, it was all like, okay, we need to be in the office every day.
Yes.
And that changed, I think. People realized, I mean, I actually, before Corona, I was already working at a company where it was more relaxed. So it was more like 2 days a week from home, maybe 3 in the rest of the office. But also because they already work with people who were remotely full time. Yeah, so then it makes more sense, because then you can be in the office every day, but some person is remotely all the time anyways. So yeah. But Corona, I think many software companies started shifting to hybrid approach. So I think a lot of software engineers learned that they can focus way better at home or at some compared to an open office with all this talking and calling and stuff. So I think that's definitely interesting. And a lot of software engineering work is focus work. So it makes sense to have your focus time as well. And it saves travel and all kinds of time waste, right? So yeah.
Do you think it's going to move back to the office after Corona is gone?
I think the smaller, the more modern, newer companies would probably go for hybrid, I think. Yeah, so I think that's maybe more traditional companies, like bigger organizations, would want to go more to the office again. That's possible. Another interesting thing I noticed is that many companies say, okay, we're going to accept full remote as well now. So for now, it's easier to work for a company in San Francisco than it was a few years back. Okay. And way more companies hiring also from Europe, just for full remote.
Didn't you plan to find a job in San Francisco, for example, or you're looking for a job here in the Netherlands?
No, I want to stay here, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay.
I like the mindset and culture of the Netherlands way better than the American way of culture, and it's more free, more mental health, personal time first, and work is important, but not the most important. In America, it's more about please work 80 hours a week because it's better for us, and that's not really what I think how it works.
Isn't it a threat for us, for programmers who live in the in Western Europe? Because we're paid better than people in Russia, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe many companies, because people work remotely anyway, maybe they will find programmers abroad in India, in Russia, and it would be much harder for us here in the Netherlands to find job.
Yeah,
I think
it is indeed true. I think there's so much demand in software engineering that the threat is not there yet for us, but it could become. Mm-hmm. There's one thing what I do see noticing now is that companies also try to pay based on the area a bit. So I think actually Google has an article about that, which is not really honest in my opinion, but they say if you live in San Francisco Bay Area, you get a higher pay than if you live somewhere in Texas. And remotely with a cheap home. So, and that's, I think that's probably what in Europe you would see as well. And on the other hand, what I notice as well is for me, it's easier to get a high paying job to work for a remote San Francisco company. So that helps me as well in negotiating salaries here. So it could also be that the salaries worldwide start to sink a bit better. That's another option which can happen. So maybe actually remote jobs in Russia would become way better in pay because the Russians know they can get that money. Right. Yeah. For a remote company as well. But how that will play out, I don't know. I'm not a macroeconomic expert. No. What I do notice, and that's also maybe good to know, I do, let's say I have a small company. I do prefer to hire someone who lives nearby because I think it makes the commitment bigger. And it's just easier to see each other for the social activities, to get a bit of culture, etc. But also, like for a remote person can very quickly change jobs. Because he's not really connected. He doesn't have a real. It can happen remote as well, but it will never be the same level as you see someone I know every week. And you get more personal relationship as well, right?
I see what you mean. Okay, so you probably would prefer to have several developers on site and several developers remotely, because with on-site developers you have more insured, right? So they're not going to.
Kinda, yeah. I mean, I think as a company, you don't really have the luxury to do it exactly as you want it. It's just who you'll find and who's good, right? That's the most important one. You need someone doing the job, basically. But I think, for example, if we would look for a co-founder, imagine I'm looking for a co-founder, I would do someone I know and can see face to face quite often if I want to. And I think that same kind of applies for a team. There's a bit of more preference to someone you can maybe see weekly or monthly compared to someone you will see never see. Yeah, you asked maybe promising areas of technologies or programming languages. Maybe that's a good one to give my 2 cents. I don't know if it's really true, of course, but I think what I currently see a couple of grow areas is machine learning for sure.
Okay.
So with machine learning, it can be various different things, but it can be data analytics. So we learn, let's say you have an application and you have all the kind of actions by users on that, and then you learn basically on that behavior. And with machine learning, we try to make it usable or readable or understandable for us because you can see all the data, but that's too much. So you make it understandable. I think that area is really important and growing. Because the only way to make choices, you need to know what's going on. And that's basically what this is all about. Machine learning is maybe more about the automatic learning of that. And you also have more like the data scientist, data engineering area, which is maybe a bit more from the graph approach. Like we're going to make graphs to figure out what's going on and find heuristics in data. But I think that's a grow area for sure, because every company needs to improve on that and work on that. You see it also basically with everything, right? Look at cars. If you look at a modern car, there are sensors everywhere. The system learns from itself, etc. It's crazy compared to an old car where it's just some metal and that's it. Oh yeah, in every area you see that way more, that we start to having data makes you make better decisions.
And what about blockchain?
Yeah, I think blockchain is interesting. There's a lot of hype around it, so that's. But with every new technology, there's hype. So imagine there was first VR. There was VR is going to change the world, and now no one does a VR thing on that.
Facebook is going to do this multiverse thing.
They're trying, yeah. A lot of companies are trying, and slowly people start to use it more where it makes sense. But I remember pictures from like 8 years ago where with Google Glass, everyone was walking around with AR, VR things. Well, it didn't happen.
It didn't happen, no.
But it will happen in some manner where it makes sense. I'm thinking, especially with remote work, remote helping someone to put something together makes sense with something like VR. So maybe it will be more and more, but yeah. And what I do like, it's for engineers who like to create games, it's an interesting domain because it's very similar. You make 3D worlds, you make interaction. The code you program, you can see happening in the world. While if you make a website, you just see a website, right? So it can be a very nice domain to work in. Blockchain tech, to give my 2 cents there, it is a very cool new area, and it allows us to change the way how companies work, how things work. So I think it's definitely interesting. Where I see where it makes most sense is where you have multiple companies working together. Nowadays, you have like maybe this foundation or consortium with a very expensive database or API where they all talk with to get something to get working together. With blockchain, that is not this one entity anymore, but it's like more shared, decentralized.
Yeah,
I think that makes it very interesting, and that will definitely give a future in the domain. It's a different way of dealing with a shared database in essence.
I see.
I see it also, for example, in Netherlands, you have the kadaster, right? So I'm not sure if it's an English thing, but I think it is.
Yeah, I know what you're talking
registers what person owns what house or what piece of land. All these kind of databases are typically very good to have decentralized, because why should one commercial company own that data? That's weird.
Let's say I'm a Russian and I want to start learning programming. What language, what technologies would you advise to start learning? And let's say I know nothing about programming.
Yeah, I think I think JavaScript and front end, making a website, an interactive website, is a very good start, because it's visually, so you have a lot of feedback of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. If you mess up, then the button doesn't show, right? So it is more feedback than maybe some API call which then doesn't work.
Okay.
So I think that's nice. I think also you should maybe look in languages who force you a bit into doing it in some way. I think, for example, Golang is quite interesting because it doesn't have all this difficult object-oriented concepts, but it's still a very good language and you can get very well paid jobs with it, but it's a bit easier to get into. And for the rest, I would say, it really depends on what you like. I would say, let's say you were into gaming. I would say maybe try to make a game. Mm-hmm. Download Unity and try to make an environment where you can walk around. I don't know. There are many tutorials you can find online, but I think it's important to start learning on things you like, because then you have a lot of motivation to just get it working or play with it. I think you should start learning things and find a project which makes you energetic on that to figure it out. For example, I remember my sister. She wanted to learn programming as well, but she was not really that. She didn't have studies in that or anything. Mm-hmm. So what she wanted to have a system where she could know if the plants need watering. You have a sensor with Bluetooth, and she would just want to get that working, and that made her learn programming. So I think that's a good thing to think about. Programming is a tool to make something happen, and it's not about. You're not going to learn a tool by just using the tool. You learn a tool by making something happen, right? So I would say don't start with programming a boring API, but make a cool game or I don't know what.